I never imagined that the boy I once held in my arms, the child whose laughter once filled my house with joy, would one day look at me with eyes colder than stone and say words that shattered my soul. "You need to leave." Just like that. No hesitation, no flicker of love or respect in his voice. Only the sharp edge of entitlement that money had carved into his heart. He wasn't the boy I raised, the boy I prayed for every single night. He wasn't the boy who once clung to me when thunderstorms frightened him. No, this was someone else. Someone blinded by $53 million he had just inherited. My husband's legacy, our family's legacy. And in his hands, it turned into a weapon. Used against me, I stood there, frozen. Every detail of that moment burned into my memory. The way his hand gestured toward the door, impatient and dismissive. The way his jaw tightened as if I was nothing more than a nuisance to be removed. And the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, as if deep down he knew what he was doing was wrong. My chest tightened, my breath caught, but I refused to let tears fall. Not in front of him. Not when he wanted me to crumble. Have you ever felt betrayal from the one person you thought would protect you, honor you, cherish you? That's the kind of wound that doesn't bleed on the outside, but it leaves scars deeper than anyone can see. That was the silence I carried inside me when I walked to my room, folded a few clothes into a worn bag, and stepped into the hallway that had once been filled with family photographs and warmth. The walls seemed colder, emptier, as if they, too, had turned against me. I closed the door behind me, and in that single motion, it felt as though decades of sacrifice and love were erased. But let me tell you something. Life has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. Sometimes the very people who push you away come crawling back, begging for the same hand they once rejected. Stay with me, because what happened only 2 days later will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, money, and love. As I walked down the quiet street, my bag heavy on my shoulder, I could see the warm glow of my neighbors' homes. Families gathered around their tables, laughter spilling into the night air. The sound was bittersweet. Once my home had been like that, alive, joyful, full of stories and warmth. Now I was on the outside, looking in as if I had become a stranger in my own life. Each step echoed louder in my ears, reminding me of the years I had devoted to raising him, protecting him, shaping him. And yet, in the end, none of that mattered. To him, I was disposable, or so he thought, because as I walked, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just grief, though grief was there, pressing hard against my chest. It wasn't just anger, though anger burned faintly, simmering under the surface. It was something else, something stronger, spark I hadn't felt in years. Fire that whispered to me that this wasn't the end of my story. That maybe, just maybe, being pushed aside wasn't my downfall. What was my chance to rise in a way no one expected? And I made a silent promise. Right there under the pale glow of the streetlights, I would not disappear quietly. I would not let my story end as the forgotten grandmother cast aside by greed. No, I would write a chapter that he and the world would never forget. Asterisk, the first night after I left his house was the hardest. I didn't sleep. I lay awake in a small room I had managed to rent on short notice, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. My mind replayed his words, over and over again like a cruel echo. You need to leave. I thought about how quickly his love had been replaced by arrogance. How money had turned the boy I loved into someone I barely recognized. I closed my eyes, and memories rushed in. His tiny hand wrapped around my finger when he was born. His smile when I baked his favorite pie. His laughter when he learned how to ride a bike in the yard. Those memories hurt now because they didn't belong to me anymore. They belonged to a version of him that no longer existed. The grandson I raised had died the moment he signed those papers and claimed that inheritance. In his place stood a man who believed money gave him the right to erase me. But I didn't weep. No, I couldn't. Tears would have been a waste, and I had shed too many in my life already. Instead, I stared into the dark and felt that fire again. The one that had sparked inside me when I walked out of his door. It flickered, then grew stronger with every breath. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through the thin curtains, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not let him define me. The second day began quietly, almost too quietly. I walked through the city, carrying myself with dignity even as my heart ached. The streets bustled with people rushing to work, couples holding hands, children tugging at their mothers' coats. Life moved on, indifferent to my pain. And yet, within that indifference, I found a strange kind of strength. No one looked at me as if I were broken. No one saw me as disposable. I was simply another face in the crowd, and somehow, that anonymity gave me courage. I stopped at a small cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and the smell of fresh bread in the air. I sat by the window, sipping bitter coffee, and thought about the years I had given to my family. The sacrifices, the long nights, the quiet patience. For so long, I had been the one holding everyone together, the one who gave without asking, who endured without complaint. And now, cast aside. But maybe this was the lesson I needed. Maybe life was telling me it was time to choose myself. Still, his face haunted me. The way he looked at me when he told me to leave, as if I were already forgotten. And deep down, I knew. He would regret it. Greed may win for a moment, but it never lasts. So very fortune he thought would set him free would soon become the weight that dragged him down. And when that moment came, I had no doubt. He would come back to me, because here's the truth people don't talk about. Money can buy comfort. But it cannot buy wisdom. It can fill pockets, but it cannot fill the empty space where love and loyalty should live. By his inheritance was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 days passed, each one stretching longer than the last. And then the phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting him sit in his arrogance. But something inside me told me to answer, to hear the desperation I already knew would be in his voice. And I was right. When I finally pressed the button and lifted the phone to my ear, the silence on the line was deafening. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear only the faint rustle of his breath, quick, uneven, almost trembling. The arrogance that had filled his voice just 2 days earlier was gone, replaced by something raw, something fragile. Fear, Grandma, he whispered. The word cracked, as though it had been dragged out of him. And just like that, my heart ached, because no matter what he had done, no matter how cruel his words had been, hearing him call me that, it stirred something deep within me. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch heavy, almost unbearable. I wanted him to feel the weight of it, the same weight I had carried when he told me to leave. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm/steady, stripped of any anger or accusation. What is it, child? And then it poured out. His voice cracked, his words tumbling over each other, desperate and panicked. Something had gone wrong. The money, the inheritance, the business deals he thought he could handle suddenly. They weren't as simple as he believed. He had signed papers without reading them, trusted people who smiled to his face but sharpened knives behind his back. Within 48 hours of his windfall, his world was unraveling. And now the very people he thought were his allies were circling like vultures. He begged me, his voice breaking on the line, to come help him, to guide him, to stand by his side the way I always had. I listened to every word cutting into me, every plea reminding me of the truth I already knew. When greed blinds you, reality strikes quickly and without mercy. Do you know what it feels like to hear the same person who cast you out, who treated you like nothing, suddenly cry for you as if you're the only lifeline left? It's a strange mix of pain and power. Part of me wanted to shout at him, to remind him of the night I walked out with tears burning behind my eyes. 2. Remind him of the coldness in his face when he pushed me aside. But another part of me, the part that still remembered his laughter as a boy, his arms around my neck, his innocent smile. That part wanted to reach through the phone and cradle him the way I once did. I closed my eyes and let his voice wash over me, let his panic sink in. He said he couldn't trust anyone else, that everyone wanted a piece of him. He said he was lost, drowning, and he didn't know who to turn to. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The very fortune that made him forget me had driven him right back into my arms, still. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence linger again, long enough for him to feel the fragility of his position. Long enough for him to understand that my presence in his life was no longer a given, it was a choice. My choice. And for the first time in a very long time, I had the power. "Please, Grandma," he whispered again, his voice breaking completely. "I need you." And as I listened, my heart heavy but strong, I knew the story was far from over. Because forgiveness is never simple. And help always comes at a price. Asterisk, I sat there with the phone pressed against my ear, his voice trembling, his breath heavy with fear, and I felt the world tilt in a way I had not expected. Just 2 days earlier, he had thrown me out like a forgotten shadow, but now he clung to me as if I were the only rope keeping him from sinking. It is strange, isn't it, how life works? The very fortune that made him dismiss me was the same one that brought him crawling back. For a long moment, I didn't say a word. Silence can be more powerful than anger, more piercing than shouting. He called my name again, his voice breaking, the boy in him suddenly alive beneath the layers of arrogance and greed. And while he begged, my mind wandered back to nights, when I stayed up with him as a child, when fevers burned his small body, and I prayed to God for his strength. Back to mornings when I worked 2 jobs just to make sure he had everything he needed, when I wore old shoes so he could have new ones, when I sacrificed quietly, never asking for thanks. And what had been my reward? To be pushed aside, dismissed, treated like an obstacle instead of a blessing. I could still see his face from that night, the hardness in his eyes, the coldness in his gesture. That memory lived inside me like a wound that refused to close. So, as he begged, part of me wanted to remind him of that, to let him feel what I felt, to let him know that some scars do not vanish, no matter how many apologies you try to place on top of them. But another part of me, the part that still believed in family, in love, in the ties that bind us, whether we want them to or not, could not turn away completely. Still my grandson, still the child I once cradled, the boy I once whispered stories to at night. And no matter how much money twisted his heart, blood still tied him to me. "Grandma, please," he whispered again, his voice softer this time, almost childlike. "I don't know what to do. Everyone wants something from me. Can't trust anyone. They're all lying. Thought I could handle it, but I can't. I need you." I closed my eyes, and in that instant I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. I thought of my late husband, the man who had built the fortune that now poisoned our family. What would he have wanted me to do? Would he have told me to turn my back, to let our grandson drown in the mess he had created? Or would he have reminded me that true strength is not in revenge, but in guiding those who have lost their way? And then another thought struck me, a dangerous, unsettling thought. Maybe this wasn't just about helping him. Maybe this was about reclaiming something I had lost: my dignity, my power, my place. For too long, I had been the silent giver, the quiet caretaker, the one who sacrificed without question. But now the balance had shifted. He needed me, desperately. And that meant, for the first time, I could set the terms. My voice was steady when I finally spoke. "If I come," I said slowly, deliberately, "things will not be the same as before. Do you understand me?" There was silence on the line, and then a choked sound, almost a sob. Yes, I understand. But did he really? Did he truly grasp what those words meant? Did he know that the grandmother he had once dismissed was no longer the same woman? That something inside me had changed forever when he turned me away? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I stepped back into his life, it would be on my terms, not his. Because when someone throws you away and then comes back begging, you have a choice. You can return as the same person they once dismissed, or you can return stronger, wiser, untouchable. And I had already decided which woman I was going to be. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at my reflection in the darkened cafe window. My eyes looked older, yes, but they also looked sharper, stronger. For the first time in a long time, I did not see weakness staring back at me. I saw resolve. Grandma. His voice cracked again on the other end. Will you help me? Toke. A long breath, my heart heavy but unshaken. I will come, I finally said, each word deliberate, almost like a promise. And a warning. But remember, these things will never be the same again. The following morning, I packed my small bag again, but this time my hands did not tremble. There was no sadness in the way I folded my clothes, no ache in the way I zipped the worn leather shut. Something inside me had shifted forever. 2 days ago, I had walked away from that house broken, cast aside like I was nothing. Today, I was walking back not as the forgotten grandmother, but as the woman holding the key to his survival. The ride to his estate felt long, yet every mile gave me more strength. I watched the city blur past through the bus window, the tall buildings shrinking into wide roads and gated neighborhoods where wealth dripped from every corner. Still, I felt strangely untouched by it all. Money no longer impressed me. Comfort no longer blinded me. I had seen what wealth did to hearts. It poisoned them. It stripped them bare and left them grasping for something they could not name. My grandson had thought $53 million would give him the world. But, in truth, it had left him alone, scared, surrounded by vultures. When the car pulled up at his mansion's gates, I saw it immediately the difference. Just days ago, when I left, the house had shone with light, music, and celebration. The air was thick with the arrogance of new fortune. Now, silence loomed heavy over the grand entrance. Curtains hung half-drawn. Shadows crawled across the windows, and the once proud home looked more like a fortress under siege. The door opened before I even knocked. And there he was, my grandson. The boy who had once sent me away with ice in his eyes now stood in front of me with tears clinging to his lashes. His shoulders slumped, his voice hoarse when he whispered, "Grandma." For a moment, I simply looked at him. I let my eyes trace the panic on his face, the restless movement of his hands, the way his once confident stance had dissolved into a boy's nervous shifting. And then I stepped inside. The scene that met me was chaos. Papers scattered across the marble floor, bottles of expensive liquor half empty on the tables, phones ringing and left unanswered. I saw documents with bold red stamps, warnings, overdue notices, legal threats. The air was thick with the scent of fear, though no one dared speak it aloud. He followed me closely, as though afraid I would vanish again if he blinked. I didn't know what I was signing, he confessed in a rush, words tumbling out like stones rolling down a hill. They told me it was safe. They said it was simple, just business. But they lied. Grandma, I trusted the wrong people. To do? I turned slowly, my eyes sharp, my voice calm. You thought money made you untouchable. And yet, here you are. He dropped his head, shame flooding his face. For the first time in days, I saw not the greedy young man who had pushed me aside, but the frightened child who once clung to my skirt when storms shook the windows. My heart ached, but I would not let it weaken me. I moved through the room, picking up one of the papers, scanning its content. Contracts, hidden clauses, debts disguised as investments. It was worse than I imagined. He had been careless, reckless. blinded by promises of more wealth. And now the wolves were at the door. Finally, I set the papers down and looked at him. You want my help, you will listen. No arguments, no arrogance, no dismissing my words as if they carry no weight. From this moment forward, you will respect me not because I am your grandmother, but because I am the only one who can pull you from this fire you've set around yourself. His eyes widened, glistening with tears. He nodded quickly, almost desperately. Yes, anything. I'll listen. I swear. And in that instant, I knew the balance had shifted completely. 2 days ago, he had pushed me out into the night. Now, he was ready to kneel if it meant I would stay. But inside, I also knew this. Helping him wouldn't just save him. It would save me. 'Cause for too long, I had lived in the shadows of others, giving, sacrificing, never demanding respect. Now, life had handed me something rare. Second chance to reclaim my strength. I stood taller, my voice firm, unshaken. Then understand this, child, I will help you. But the woman who walked out 2 days ago is gone. I will not be dismissed. I will not be forgotten. If I step back into your life, it will be as the one who holds the pen to rewrite this story. And if you betray me again, you will lose far more than money. The room went still, his breathing shallow, his eyes locked on mine. For the first time in his life, he looked at me not just as his grandmother, but as the force that could either save him or let him drown. Asterisk, I spent that night under his roof again. But it no longer felt like home. The house was cold, not from the air, but from the weight of mistakes pressing down on its walls. Every corner whispered of arrogance turned to ruin. I could not sleep, not because of fear, but because I was already planning. I sat at the old oak desk in his study, papers spread before me like broken pieces of a puzzle. Contracts with fine print designed to trap, signatures rushed onto lines he hadn't read, deals that promised glory but delivered chains. The vultures who had tricked him were clever, yes. But they hadn't counted on me. Morning came quietly. The pale sun bleeding through the curtains, stumbled in, his eyes swollen from sleeplessness, his face etched with worry. Grandma, what do we do? The words were heavy, desperate. Once he had looked at me like I was a burden. Now he looked at me like I was the last piece of solid ground beneath his sinking feet. I looked up slowly, holding one of the contracts in my hand. We do what you should have done from the beginning, I said firmly. We pay attention. We ask questions, and we show them that you are not alone. Later that afternoon, they came. 3 men in polished suits, smiles stretched too wide, voices dripping with false charm. They had the air of predators who believed the meal was already theirs. I watched from the armchair as my grandson greeted them, his voice shaky, his hands restless. They barely glanced at him before turning their sharp eyes to me. And you are? One of them asked, his tone dismissive, as if I were nothing more than an old woman sitting quietly in the background. I smiled. But it was not the soft smile of a grandmother. It was sharper, colder. I am the one who will make sure you don't take another step without answering my questions. The room shifted. They laughed at first, a small patronizing chuckle. But when I laid the papers on the table, every clause highlighted, every trap circled in red, their laughter died. Their eyes narrowed. One of them cleared his throat. These are standard agreements, he muttered. No, I said evenly, my voice steady as stone. These are weapons. Designed to strip him of control, to leave him bound while you take everything. And you thought he would never notice, but he has me now. They exchanged glances, their confidence cracking. My grandson sat silent beside me, his eyes wide as he watched me dismantle their lies piece by piece. For the first time in his life, he saw me not just as his grandmother, but as a shield. As a force he had underestimated, the tallest of the men leaned forward, his voice low, threatening. You don't understand how business works. I leaned forward too, meeting his gaze without fear. And you don't understand how family works. He may have been blind, but I am not. If you think I will let you destroy him, you've chosen the wrong prey. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then one of them shifted in his seat, uneasy. The power had shifted. They knew it, and I knew it. They had not come expecting resistance, least of all from an old woman they thought irrelevant. But I was not irrelevant. I was the storm they didn't see coming. When they finally left, their polished smiles cracked at the edges, I turned to my grandson. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, as though he didn't recognize me. "Grandma," he whispered, "I never knew you had this in you." I met his gaze firmly. "You never looked close enough to see." He lowered his head, ashamed. "I'm sorry for everything, for the way I treated you, for pushing you out. I was wrong." I placed a hand on his shoulder, steady but not soft. "Sorry is only the beginning. You will learn, child, that respect is earned daily, not spoken once. From now on, you will listen, and you will remember." In that moment, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just about saving him. This was about teaching him, about showing him that life will strip you bare if you walk blindly. And maybe, just maybe, this downfall was the only way he could ever rise. But deep inside, I also knew something darker. If these men had tried once, they would try again. And next time, they might not come with contracts and smiles. They might come with sharper weapons. And I would need to be ready. The days that followed were unlike anything my grandson had ever experienced. He was used to being surrounded by friends who praised him, who clapped him on the back, who toasted to his wealth with expensive wine. But now, those so-called friends had vanished like shadows at sunrise. The house was quieter, colder, but not because it was empty. No, it was because truth had settled into its walls. And truth can be heavier than stone. I sat at his desk every morning, papers spread in front of me, glasses perched on my nose. He would stand nearby, restless, nervous, like a boy waiting for punishment. And in a way, it was punishment, though. Not the kind he expected. Every time I uncovered another mistake, another reckless signature, another foolish decision, I saw him shrink a little more. It hurt me, yes, but it was necessary. Because he had to see, truly see, the weight of his arrogance. "Read it," I told him one afternoon, sliding a contract toward him. He hesitated, his eyes scanning the endless paragraphs of small print. Out loud, I pressed. His voice shook as he stumbled through the words, realizing how blind he had been. By the end, his face was pale, his lips pressed tight. "It didn't." "No," he whispered. "That's the problem," I answered firmly. "You didn't want to know. You thought money would protect you. But money without wisdom is a curse, not a blessing." He bowed his head, tears glistening, and for a fleeting second saw the boy I once knew, not the arrogant young man who had cast me aside, but the child who looked to me for answers, for comfort, for guidance. That boy was still there, buried beneath pride, waiting to be found again. But I wasn't going to let him off easily. Forgiveness could not be free. "If I help you, you will change," I told him. "You will respect not just me, but the lessons I give you. You will stop chasing empty praise and start building something real. Do you understand?" He nodded, quickly desperate. "Yes, Grandma, I promise. Just don't leave me again." For a moment, the words pierced my heart. He didn't say, "Don't let them take everything," or "Don't let me lose the money." He said, "Don't leave me again." And in that, I heard the truth. He feared not the loss of wealth, but the loss of family. Perhaps finally, he was beginning to see. I spent long nights teaching him how to read every word before signing, how to ask the questions no one wanted, him to ask how to see beyond the smiles of men who wanted to profit from his ignorance. And slowly, I saw change. His posture grew firmer, his eyes more alert, his words more careful. He was learning, but change is never simple. The men who had tricked him began to circle again, this time with sharper smiles, colder threats. I could feel their presence in every phone call, every knock on the door. My grandson shook when he heard their voices. But me, I didn't flinch. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, I stood at the window while he paced nervously behind me. "They're going to come back," he said, fear dripping from his voice. "They'll take everything if we fight them." I turned slowly, meeting his eyes with calm fire. "Then let them come. They don't know me. They don't know what I'm capable of." And in that moment, for the first time, I saw respect in his eyes. Not the forced respect of obligation, but the real kind, born of awe, born of understanding. He finally saw me not as someone to discard, but as someone to follow. Still, deep inside, I knew this battle was far from over. These men were not used to losing. They would strike harder, faster, more ruthless. And when they did, my grandson would face his greatest test. And I would decide whether to protect him again or let him fall. The storm came on a Thursday. Not rain, not thunder, but men in dark suits, polished shoes echoing on the marble floors as they entered the house without waiting for permission. Their smiles were gone now. Their patience had run out. They were not here to persuade. They were here to claim what they believed belonged to them. My grandson froze in the hallway, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. He looked at me, his lips parting to speak, but no words came. I stepped forward before he could, my footsteps steady, my heart unshaken. Age had lined my face. Yes, but in that moment I felt taller than all of them. One of the men placed a folder on the table, slamming it down like a judge's gavel. "You've delayed long enough," he said coldly. "Either sign these transfers, or we'll take this matter further, and trust me, you don't want that." My grandson lowered his head, shame flooding his features. But I reached out, placing a firm hand on his arm. "Don't you dare," I whispered, my voice sharp as steel. Then I turned my gaze on the men. "You've taken advantage of his ignorance long enough, but this ends tonight." They laughed. At first, mocking. "And what exactly are you going to do?" I lifted the folder, flipping through the pages slowly, deliberately. Every clause, every hidden trap, every crooked word was already burned into my mind from nights of study. "You think I don't see it?" I asked, my voice calm, unwavering. "Do you think you can hide behind your polished words and fine print? These documents are poison. And if you force this, it will not end in silence. It will end in court. And I will be there every single day until the truth bleeds through your lies." Their smiles faltered. I could see the flicker of unease in their eyes. Men like this are not afraid of wealth, not afraid of arrogance. But they are afraid of someone who refuses to be broken, someone who will fight with nothing to lose. And I had nothing left to lose. One of them leaned closer, his voice low, threatening. "You're playing a dangerous game, old woman." I leaned closer to meeting his eyes without flinching. "No, you are, 'cause you underestimated the wrong grandmother." The room fell into silence, thick and sharp. Finally, they gathered their papers, their jaws tight, their steps heavy as they left. The door slammed shut, and with it, the air seemed to lighten. My grandson collapsed into the chair, his body trembling, his face pale as if he had just escaped. "Drowning, Grandma?" he whispered, his voice breaking. I thought I had lost everything." "But you," I raised my hand, silencing him. "You almost did. Not just the money. Me, and without me, you would have nothing." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and tears filled his eyes. "I'm sorry. For all of it, I let money blind me. I forgot what mattered. I studied him for a long moment. He was not the boy I raised anymore, but perhaps he could become a man worthy of the lessons I still carried." Finally, I nodded. "Sorry is only the beginning. If you want my forgiveness, if you want to rebuild what you broke, you will prove it. Every day, with your choices, with your actions. And if you fail, I let the words hang heavy, unfinished. He swallowed hard, nodding quickly. In the days that followed, the house changed. Shadows lifted. The vultures circled less, their threats quieter now that they knew I stood in the doorway. My grandson no longer carried himself with arrogance, but with humility. He sat with me at the table, learning, listening, asking questions instead of assuming answers. Slowly, I saw the boy I loved emerge again, reshaped by fire, tempered by fear, and me. I discovered something too. I discovered that strength does not fade with age. That sometimes it grows sharper, clearer when life tests you hardest. I had thought I was finished when he cast me aside, but instead had only just begun. The world may measure wealth in millions of dollars, but I measure it differently now. True wealth is not money. It is dignity, respect, the strength to rise when others expect you to fall. And in that, I was richer than any of them. So when I look at my grandson now, I do not see the boy who betrayed me. I see the boy who begged for my help. I see the man he is struggling to become. And though the road will be long, I will walk beside him not as the fragile grandmother he once dismissed, but as the storm he never saw coming. Because sometimes the ones we cast out return as our salvation. Sometimes the forgotten grandmother becomes the one who writes the final chapter.